And welcome to another episode of Experts Speak. I'm Michael DeLon, and today I am talking with Kristin Molenaar. Kristin, thanks for squeezing some time in and being on our podcast.
Thank you for having me, Michael. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Well, it's going to be lots of fun. Kristin is the CEO and the founder of Yes Boss, which is they're a virtual agency, which I really thought was cool, but you help business owners elevate their visibility and their credibility by getting them booked and featured on podcasts. And that is, as I would say, my term is wicked cool, because that's part of what we help our clients do, is create a profitable podcast. And we teach a similar strategy, but not all of my audience are my clients. And so I want to introduce them to you because you have an entire system around this. And if you love spending time sharing your knowledge, right, but you want to work less and you want to do more talking and exposing yourself, you're going to enjoy what Kristin has to say, because she's got a great program. So first of all, Kristin, thanks again. Tell us a little bit about you. Give us an on-ramp of who you are, why do you do what you do, and a little bit about your company, okay?
Yeah. So I feel like when I'm asked that question, it is only fair to start with the fact that I came into this entrepreneur thing in 2014 as an absolute, utter entrepreneurial failure. Boom. There you go.
There you go.
So, I was a really great employee, thought I had a really good work ethic, had done really well at every job that I had, and thought I have what it takes to be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
Learned that the transferable skills are very few and far between, and really struggled for the first 14 years. Or for 14 years. Wow. I'm glad it wasn't that long. Thank you, Lord. It was not 14 months. And so I then decided that I didn't want to sacrifice my freedom, but I needed to make some kind of money. And freedom was always the biggest thing for me with my entrepreneurial journey. And I had always heard about the virtual assistant world. So I decided, you know what, I could be a virtual assistant. Let's go ahead and do that. I need to make some kind of money. So I'll start trading dollars for time again, but without sacrificing my physical location, right?
Yes.
So I quickly got a virtual assistant client, looked at the work that I was given. I was asked to do a blog post for the nursing industry, and right away went, ugh, this is awful. This is absolutely awful. So I delegated it, and out of the realization that delegation was so amazing, I actually grew a virtual assistant agency. And so fast forward 2018, my virtual assistant agency is doing pretty well. My team really is pretty self-sufficient. They're very self-led. I'm very blessed with a really great team. I decided that I wanted to do podcasts. I thought, I want to talk to people about how to work less, make more, mistakes I made as an entrepreneur, so on and so forth. And so I started podcast guesting. Admittedly, after 6 months of talking about it, my team finally started pitching for me because I had a lot of imposter syndrome that was going on. So delegated that too. So delegated getting me on podcasts because I couldn't get out of my own head. Started podcast guesting and realized, oh my gosh, this was something I thought I'd do philanthropically. And this has been the biggest lead generator, the biggest business builder for me. And that was when we 2019 is when we drew the line in the sand. No, 2020 officially is when we drew the line in the sand, stopped taking on any virtual assistant clients and said, we're only getting clients booked on podcasts because this strategy is gold. So that's kind of like the evolution of my entrepreneur journey. And that's how we ended up where we are now.
That's awesome. And I hope people are actually listening. If not, go back and listen, because you just dropped a bunch of grenades right there, which are really good as far as business. So you delegated, which was awesome. So many people, I talk to people all the time about virtual assistants and how easy it is to find them and hire them and train them and let them do the things that you don't want to do.
Absolutely.
But people are hesitant. So I would send you to Kristin, but she's not taking on any more clients. But get a virtual assistant, get out of the job of doing everything.
Yeah.
You mentioned trading dollars for hours. That's so many times business owners still do that. We say, honestly, Kristin, I tell most business owners that I work with that you're really not a business owner. You just have a high paying job.
Self-employed.
They really are. Yeah. Because if they get hit by a truck, they're done. The business is done. They go bye-bye.
Yeah.
Unless they build systems and delegate everything that you were talking about there. Yeah. And then the realization, and kudos to you for letting go, right? Because you let your team come in and take over something that you really weren't great at. You had that imposter syndrome, which so many of us have.
Yep.
And even when you get booked on a podcast, if you come on in and you're not real, if you're not yourself, it shows. We can hear that.
I think so.
Oh, totally.
I think we've all listened to those podcasts before.
Yes. Thank you for having me today. It is a joy to be here. It's like, oh, shut up. I want to know you. I want to know Kristin. And if I connect with you here, guess what? I am more likely to go to your website. When I go to your website, I'm more likely to opt in. When I opt in, I'm more likely to buy, right? It's just that know, like, and trust factor that we all talk about.
Yeah.
But podcasting is so cool because it's just like going to a party or whatever. What do? You strike up a conversation, you find some common ground, you get interested, and it's like, hey, can I have your card? And we follow up. That's all it is. You just kind of put that on steroids, right? Let's talk about that and how important it is for a business owner to be a guest, be featured on somebody else's podcast, and how that shortens the lead gen cycle, right? You don't have to have this big long funnel or go do Facebook ads or anything like that. If you can find a system and a way of systematically getting on somebody's podcast, unpack that a little bit and talk about, well, what's on your website, the 3 reasons why you love being a podcast guest. But from a business owner's perspective, let's talk about that.
I feel like I prepped you with like what I was going to say so that you could tee me up to sound really smart right now, because you've just taken so many of the words and the phrases that I use and the concepts that I try to help people understand. And you've just said it really succinctly. You've given us a great summary, and I would love to unpack it because you and I are totally on the same page. I call being a podcast guest networking on steroids. And I call it networking on steroids because there's no other environment that facilitates so much know, like, and trust factor. Mm-hmm. You're right. I mean, this is not a cold lead strategy. This is attracting a warm lead strategy. Yep. And I want everyone that's listening to kind of think about this for a while, because I think that you and I like get it, but I think that it's something that like we can really drive home even further. We as business owners spend a lot of time meeting other business owners and networking, right? But every time you're networking, it's like knocking on somebody's door and saying like, hey, can I talk to you about me? Well, nobody really wants to hear about the other person. Like that's kind of the reality of things. We all want to talk about ourselves. We don't really want to hear about somebody else. But the very nature of being a podcast guest is me as the guest saying, hey, can I help you fulfill an objective that you already have? Provide value to your audience, right? Then what happens is I have the podcast host's undivided attention. And you know what you're doing right now? You're asking me to talk all about me.
Absolutely.
In what other environment would I be able to talk naturally, not awkwardly, about myself and what I do and what makes me smart and what makes my methodology work? In what other environment would I be able to talk about those things for 30 minutes to an hour and have your undivided attention? So that's why this is networking on steroids. Not only do I have the host's attention, but the audience. Like, in what other environment does somebody that you're trying to reach on, from an audience perspective, do they listen to somebody for 30 minutes? I mean, that's not happening on social media. That's not happening usually when you meet in networking events. It's just this wild thing that when I looked back and I was trying to unpack, like, why is being a podcast guest working for me? Like, I had no idea about any of this. I had never hypothesized about it. It was just this like, wow, I'm meeting people. They're introducing me to people in their network. Other opportunities are coming up out of this. I was invited to speak, or I'm invited to be like a guest expert in somebody's, paid mastermind or in their course, or introducing me to another podcast host. Like, it was just astounding to me. But it made sense when you really looked at like the psychology behind it. It's networking on steroids.
It is. And the other thing I love about it is that it's networking on steroids that has an evergreen effect, because we're going to put this out on our podcast channels. We're going to host it on our website. It's going to be out there for a long time. And as I write emails to my list, I'm going to be able to refer back to this, and you are too. So even people at the networking meeting who aren't there at the meeting, they're still going to be able to hear about you.
You're right. You're right.
And people forget about that. And the fact that I can carry it around on my phone. I can listen and re-listen and all of that. So it is definitely a way to attract new business, but you have to come at it from the right perspective. And, it's not, hey, can I talk about me? Can I talk about me? It's no, how can I help you and your audience?
Yeah.
Right. Because you have something of value to share. That's why I brought you on my podcast. Right. Some people would look at us, Kristin, and say, well, she's a competitor. Well, she does what I do in a sense, but there are so many people on my list who aren't my clients. They need to understand this strategy, and podcasting is kind of like creating a book. It's this big mountain if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
And you help simplify that, right?
Definitely. We absolutely help simplify it. Yeah, I was trying to think where I was going to go with that, because something was in my mind and then I was so focused on making sure I was listening to what you were saying. Have you ever had that happen?
Which is really good. Yeah.
You're like, don't be a bad listener and just think about what you want to say.
Then I'll forget. Yeah. I write things down to my wife all the time and say, I'm going to write that down, because otherwise
otherwise it's just going to like poof, be gone.
Yeah.
Oh, that was one of the things I was thinking about. You were talking about the evergreen content. And I think another thing that came to my mind is the inherent credibility that happens when you're on a podcast. So let's talk about, evergreen content, and let's talk about the credibility that happens. Evergreen content, you as the host and me as the guest, we can repurpose this content. And this content is something that is in our authentic voice that you can then delegate more easily to somebody else. I don't know if you've ever written a prompt for somebody to write like social media content or blogs or emails for you, but like trying to give them a prompt is really hard. Yes. But giving them a piece of original content, and that's what I do with my podcast, is I give it to somebody on my team and they then create repurposed content out of that. So the content keeps going, and that's not even to say that the actual podcast episode is evergreen. Right. One of the things that I like doing that I think a lot of people dismiss when it comes to being a podcast guest, and I hope this lowers the barriers for some, is I actually like going on newer podcasts, because what happens is as podcasts grow, people discover them more and more and more. And what do? It's like Netflix. We go back and we look at, well, what was at the beginning?
Right.
Who were they interviewing at the beginning of this podcast? And so I would say for people that are a little bit intimidated by it, like focus on some of the newer podcasts, because it has that evergreen shelf life that's going to happen, that's going to give you credibility maybe down the line. And the other thing is that credibility aspect. Now, when I use this recording or tidbits of this recording to post on my LinkedIn, I'm sitting here next to you, Michael. And what does that tell people? It tells me that I'm a liked person, because obviously if Michael asked me to be on the podcast, people can make the assumption that he likes me. I hope that will be true when we're done recording, right? And people liked people.
Yes.
And they tend to kind of follow along. So rather than having to feel like you're producing all your own content to tell the world that you're amazing, and I'm like trying to figure out how to tell people like, yes, being a podcast host or podcast guest works. Yeah. Yes, getting on podcasts is networking on steroids. Instead of me having to hammer all those points home, you sitting in the same virtual room with me, you're giving that everything that I have to say credibility just by being here and being on the same screen with me. It's really powerful and incredible.
It is. And once you have your podcast going, so it's a double-edged sword here, right? Two sides of the same coin. You get your podcast going, but even before you get your podcast going, even if you don't have a podcast, you can be a guest on somebody else's, right? You don't have to have a podcast back and forth, because you have content to share. And so reaching out to somebody who has a podcast, look for somebody with your audience, somebody that you could serve and add value to them and their audience. And don't go in there thinking, but when I do this, what's my call to action? How do I get them back to my website? Right?
It's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. So I have a lot of people come to me and they talk about, the goals of what podcast they want to be on. And they have these like big goals because of the audience behind them. And not to say that it's not great to go after big things, whatever. But what I've found time and time again is being a profitable podcast guest. So that's like the thing that I'm really focused on here. being profitable is 25% about actually showing up and doing the interview and 75% about what happens after the interview. Frankly, I don't care if you let me talk about where people can follow me on social media, what my website is. I don't care if you do that, allow me to do that or not. It really doesn't faze me. It's my job to show up and provide a lot of value, because if you focus on the relationship, if you think about this as networking on steroids, what's going to happen is, what can you and I, you, Michael, and me, Kristin, what can we do beyond the recording of this episode that's going to elevate both of our like visibility strategies, both of our credibility strategies? And I've found that that is the most important thing that I can give to my clients, is teaching them what they can do with the relationship beyond just that interview recording. I feel
That's
like we're
brilliant.
just speaking so much of the
That's
same
brilliant.
language.
Can I just hug you? I mean, the fact that you came out with profitable podcasts, that's what we call our whole program, is having a profitable podcast, because we teach our business clients just this, exactly what you talked about. And it flows into marketing as well, because too many business owners want the sale today.
Yeah.
And I need more leads. It's like, no, you need to work the leads you've got, because 75% of your business is going to come in the long tail of those prospects. Exactly what you just said.
And it all starts with leading with generosity.
It is.
Showing up, leading with generosity, and being relationship focused, not lead focused. The leads are something that comes as a result of having that genuine, those genuine objectives.
Yeah.
And I
Absolutely.
would prefer to have a business that has longevity than a business that's hot now and gone the next second.
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say? Yeah, I've got all kinds of examples there. You have a fun phrase here, and it talks about when you're a guest on a podcast, you call it staying in your zone of genius. What? Unpack that. I love that phrase. Unpack that for us. What is a zone of genius?
Well, okay, zone of genius is something that you do that you're really good at, that reinvigorates you. So there's a lot of things that's for me how I define it. So there's a lot of things you have to do as a business owner that I should rephrase that. There's a lot of things that your business needs as a business. You've got to figure out what areas you are going to serve in your business. And the idea for me is, I look at all the things that I do, and the way that I measure this is this activity giving me more energy, or is it depleting my energy? Now, as a mom of a 3.5-year-old, it is especially important that my business give me energy, because my 3-year-old is going to really work hard on taking advantage of that, we will say, right?
Yep.
He needs all that energy, right? So my business needs to give me energy. And what I have found, it's funny, if you go to my website, you'll see I said, hi, my name is Kristin, and talking is my zone of genius.
Mm-hmm.
What I've found is I can show up and talk about what I do all day long. Like, this fuels me. Well, I should rephrase that. I can talk to other people about what I do. This really fuels me up. I'm not so great about, I can do it, but I'm not so great about sitting behind my computer and doing it all by myself. It's that connection, like talking, and that connection that's happening with my business. And I think that a lot of people, including myself, more towards the beginning of my business, if you had told me that I could use talking to a profitable advantage, I would have been like, I don't really get it. But I feel like this is the way that you do it. You get yourself strategically in the room with the right people. You talk about what you know. You talk about what you love. You're authentic, and relationships are built, and relationships fuel the profitability of our businesses.
They really do, because the relationship goes back to the know, like, trust factor, right? At the end of this podcast, you and I are going to leave, and as soon as we click off the Zoom button, we're going to both go, I like him. I like her. We need, or we're going to say, never want to talk to that person again. Right. I mean, hopefully that's not it, but it is the relationship aspect of saying, how can I serve you? Because you have an audience that can probably use a portion of what I do. I have an audience, a lot of them, who can use what you do, because it's, when we think marketing, too many times we go back into direct mail or LinkedIn, Facebook ads, website funnels, all that stuff that just drains me.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have that. It's like, well, they're good to have, but you don't have to. You can build a business by being a guest on a podcast. You could, I mean, could somebody, is it feasible for a business owner to say, you know what, I want to be on, and you would have to work this out, a new podcast every month or every week? Is that feasible?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've just got to work to figure out A couple things. So we help our clients write talking points, and talking points really shape the narrative of a conversation. And so if you can come up with good talking points, then that means that you're ready to be a guest on podcast. So there's a couple things here. Number one, what's your transformation story? Like, people are going to ask about your story. So you asked me at the beginning, tell us about you. Well, what's the transformation story? Why do I do what I do? Like, how did I get here? Couple things. How am I both relatable and inspirational? That's the transformation story. So if you can figure that out and how it relates to your business, great. Second is, what are some case studies? So how have you used what you do to help other people? Those are things you need to keep in mind. And we write talking points around this. And the third is, what is your methodology? So specifically, what do you do? And how can you, how can you talk about that in a way that's going to provide the person on the other end with the knowledge that they need to actually do what you do for themselves? I think that that's when you know that you've really hit the nail on the head. Is somebody else could go in and if somebody hears me and they say, okay, cool, I heard Kristin say that it's really good to get me booked on new podcasts. Okay, she broke down the barriers. That feels really tangible. She's talked to me about, what my talking point should be. So I'm going to go after new podcasts, and I'm going to send them my talking points, and I'm just going to get myself on podcasts. I know that I've showed up and provided valuable content if somebody else can do that. But here's the reality, because I think that would scare some people. Here's the reality. You can Google everything. There are no secrets anymore. Anybody can do what I do. Yes, I provide shortcuts, but our ideal clients are the ones that want the shortcuts. So go ahead and just share everything you know. And the people that want that shortcut, it's been proven that you know what you do, and then they're going to want to work with you. So anyways, I feel like I could rant on this, because people need to understand it's all about giving. It's all about showing up, about the relationships, all about putting it all out there. And yeah, I could just keep going.
Yeah, but it's so true. So I was had a guy on my podcast a few months ago, and at the end of the call, he's like, "Hey, by the way, I've got this forum thing coming up with a few experts and things. I'd love to have you as part of that, because you're a publisher and I don't have that." And it's like, "Great, thanks."
Yep.
Brand new audience. I didn't know he did those things, right?
Yeah.
But it came out of the relationship, and I love how you say show up. If you just show up, be authentic. Have your talking points. And that goes back to what you talked about earlier, the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Too many times we think, well, I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. And I tell everybody, Kristin, you just got to be a step ahead of everybody. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not rocket science. Everybody listening to this has enough content and information to go to the next step. I love how you shared that transformation story and that origin story of yours. Right. So what gives you energy? We know writing blogs for certain industries does not energize you. We get that. But that is memorable, right? I always start mine by saying, Kristin, I started the day that I found myself in prison. And it wasn't a literal prison. It was a prison of a job I hated. Right. And that's when the light bulb came on to me that I needed to make a change. And so I tell that story because that resonates. Everybody's been in a job they hated. Yep. How did I get out of it? What do I do now? And how can I help you do it? So every business owner listening to this has that story. It's just a matter of codifying it and making it bullet point to go, oh, I can tell that 1,000 times.
Well, and there's a point right there. Tell it 1,000 times. So it's not about reinventing the wheel every time you're on a podcast either. The secret about marketing is you've got to be repetitive. So I tell, clients ask me, well, how often should I revisit my talking points? And here's my answer. When you feel like you're not being asked the right questions to talk about the right things. But the reality is, if you've said the same thing so many times that you're tired of saying it, maybe you've said it almost enough. Almost.
But every new podcast you're on, that's a new audience who's never heard that story.
Yeah, it is. So you've got to get out of your head thinking, I'm not going to tell the same story again. Well, the people listening have not heard this story. The person that you're sitting in the room with that's interviewed you, they might not have heard this story before.
That's right. Yeah, we call it story fatigue. And the only person who gets it is you. And so I just tell my clients, get over it and tell the story. But tell it passionately, because you've got to, and that's the other thing, you were telling your story, you were passionate. I was there. I was living it with you. And that's how we need to show up on podcasts, because again, people listen to this and they're like, they get a feeling. You're giving good content. Yeah. But I'm connecting with you on an emotional basis as well. And that's where all of our decisions are made emotionally. Right. And so as you show up on podcasts, especially now because they're video podcasts as well, just show up, be yourself and bring the goods, but be yourself, because marketing is all about attracting the right type of people, and they're going to be attracted to who you are more than what you do, because you're right. You can find it all on Google.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I love the sequence that you have. So when somebody signs or gets on your calendar to be on your podcast, I love how multiple times the emails that you sent to me reminded me of this scheduled event were like, just relax, be yourself. It's going to be easy. I love that because I have a lot of clients come to me and ask, like, what can I do to prepare? And I'm honest with them. I say, well, what I do to prepare is like, I make sure that I look okay. I blow my nose, so I'm sniffling the least amount possible. I turn on this light in front of me so that I have good lighting, and I relax and realize that if I don't know the answer to a question, I don't answer it. And one of the things that I think might be somebody's worst nightmare is like, you asked me a question or you paused in the conversation and I said, well, there was something I was going to say, but now I can't think of it. And I think some people would be like, I don't want that to happen. But here's the thing. This is a conversation. And if you and I were talking, like, because we met at a networking event, that's the exact same thing I would say to you, because I'm human. Like, right. This is human. And I don't think that anybody that heard me say that is going, oh, well, Kristin, I mean, she's a, ditz over there. I can't believe she said that. No way I'm working with her. No, nobody's thinking about that. They're going, well, that was real. She lost her train of thought and she was honest about it.
Yeah. And that's why I do. And I told you before we started, my podcasts are unedited, casual conversations. And, we have people in here stumbling and going, I don't care. That's you. I want people to know you, because when they do, they're going to be more likely to reach out to you and follow you and just,
Yeah. And it'll refine along the way. I have this one girl that I love. She's so awesome. She told me about a month ago, she's like, I've been listening to all your podcast interviews. And I said to her, why? I'm talking about the same thing every time. And she said that it was really fascinating for her because she saw how my message became more and more succinct, and how the things that hit really well, they were the things that I kept like expanding on. And she said that it was cool to see my progression. And I actually credit being able to progress in my skill, I guess you would say, as a podcast guest, is I send all of my podcast interviews to a video editor and they do content repurposing for me. And what I've learned is that the ability to talk in like snack size pieces of content is really, really important. So people can pull little things out of what I say that has a lot of impact in and of itself and is really clear. And seeing how my video editor repurposes my content has actually made me a better speaker. So I think that the lesson here is when you record an interview with somebody, actually listen. You'll realize the filler words that you use and you'll stop using them. You'll realize the kinks in your story that you need to get out. You'll realize how you can hammer a point home even more clearly. But that does not come until you're actually doing it. I don't think that I could just, not me anyways, I don't think I could just practice that out of my system. My practice is in the doing. And by practicing in the doing, I'm meeting a lot of wonderful people along the way and producing a lot of really great content.
Yeah. And that's great. And that's one of the action points out of this podcast that I have for my listeners is to do it. Get going and stop saying, well, I've got to do this and this. No, do it. Launch, just go to iTunes. I mean, where would they find go to iTunes and start looking at podcasts? Would that be like a first step? Let's say I've got a financial advisor. Right. Who deals with retirement planning, and they want to get on somebody's podcast. So that would be, let's say, an estate planning attorney. That would be a good audience, right? So what would be a kind of a first 1 or 2 steps that they should take?
So I don't actually recommend going to iTunes, because what iTunes is going to serve up to you is a lot of podcasts that are going to have a lot of competition because they're more established podcasts, because the algorithm says we want to show you the most popular shows, right? And those are going to be the least likely to get on if you're new on podcasting. What we do is we have a strategy called following the influencer path. And this is something that anybody can do. The idea here is to find somebody who has talked about something that's complementary to what you talk about, but not competitive, and that has also been on podcasts in the past. We then go and we plug that person's name. You could even just do it on Google and you say, like Kristin Molenaar podcast interview. And then what's going to happen is all the podcasts that I've been on previously are going to show up in the search. And then I would start pitching myself to those different places. So one of the ways to find, influencers that you can follow is actually looking on Amazon, which I feel like this is going to be more your forte than mine, but looking for people that have released a book within the last 3 to 5 years. A lot of these people are doing podcast tours to talk about their books. So be searching keywords on Amazon for something that's complementary to what you're doing. So, a financial advisor, maybe you want to go in and look at somebody, let's see, what's a good example here. Financial advisor, want to go with somebody like estate planning. I think is that what you said?
Yeah,
was
and that's a great one.
Say that's a complimentary thing. Go in and find people that have written recently about estate planning and then see if they've been on podcasts. The other way that you can do this is getting into Facebook groups that are all for people that are launching their podcasts. So if you specifically want to look for newer podcasts, this can be a little bit more time consuming in the research because not everything that I would say most of what you find is not going to be relevant. But it is another strategy to get involved in newer podcasts. One of the things that we do is we find podcast production companies and we ask them if they have new podcasters that are launching new shows that need guests. That's another great strategy.
That's good. And the one thing I've got to put out here for all the listeners. All right. So if you have a podcast, what is the one thing, Kristin, you need on your podcast is fresh content.
Yeah.
Right. And most of the time you might launch a podcast with 4 or 5 or 6 episodes. After that, you're going, what am I going to talk about?
Right.
And to have somebody reach out and say, hey, could I be a guest? Because here's what I can bring to your audience. You go, right? Most of the time. But it's not as hard as people think it is. It just takes a little bit of gumption to reach out through an email or some system and say, hey, here's what I've got. Can we have a conversation? And it's crazy because anybody listening to this might think that you and I have known each other for like 30 years because we get along so well and we read each other's minds and we answer each other's questions, but we don't. Kristin and I just met just a few minutes ago, right? But that's the beauty of this whole thing. And we'll be friends for life now because we have lots in common. And together we can help lots of business owners do lots of really cool things. So
yeah, it's synergy is what I call it. There's synergy between, what you're doing and what I'm doing. And we have the same business methodologies. We have the same, foundational beliefs about business. And that is what makes networking on steroids. It makes it so wonderful. You and I were able to get to the core of it. Like, would we have discovered all these things about one another if we had met in a networking event and we were in a hurry to meet as many other people as we could? Maybe not. But because we were able to sit here and share for, over 30 minutes now, we were able to get to the core of those issues and see like, there's some longevity here. We know that we can bring value to one another's audience. And I know that I like you. I know that I do. And I wouldn't have known maybe within a couple minutes. Well, you're a really likable guy. It comes off very easily. So maybe I would have, but we were able to dig deeper.
Well, but part of that, Kristin, is because of what you did. Okay. And I tell this to my clients all the time. What you did is on your website, in the bio section of your website, it's really cool, but you put in some things about being a foster mom, an adoptive mom, things of that nature, a follower of Christ. All of those resonated with me immediately. And I thought, I don't care what we talk about, we're going to bond, right? On your website bio, your LinkedIn bio, your Facebook bio, put some personal information. Let me get to know who you are to say, oh, we have some things in common. It makes the conversation go so much easier. And it allows you to get to that common ground so much faster to go, yeah, I really do like this person. So thank you for doing that because that helps a ton. And I just hope my listeners will take that counsel from you and that advice and make their bios a little more personal than the stagnant stuff that we always get.
Well, it can also be fluid in conversations, throwing in those little tidbits about yourself. Like, I didn't spend a ton of time or a full complete paragraph telling you that I have a 3-year-old. I didn't. It was just this little like side note that I included. And so I think that those tidbits need to be included. You need to be adding those personal aspects, and you need to be adding some of those credibility aspects. I think that you'll notice in some of this conversation, if you were to go back and listen, some of the credibility that you and I both just like casually threw in, like you saying, I talk to clients about this all the time. Well, you're showing us this is what you do with clients, and me talking about being a podcast guest. Some of the ways that we tee up the conversations, or just these like couple words that we throw in, it adds this like layer of connection and understanding with the people listening to us.
Absolutely. I call those brand bites.
I like it.
So you have a brand and a brand strategy, but you've got these little bites that make up the brand and that you can just drop in anywhere. And they should be delicious morsels that make me want more. Right?
I love it.
All right. Well, Kristin, thank you so much. Where, if somebody's interested, hopefully they are after they've listened to this. What's your website? Where can they go find out more about you and what you do in your company and how you can help them with becoming a podcast guest?
Yeah, our website is yesbossva.com. And the only place that I hang out is on podcasts, getting interviewed right now. I don't have my own podcast as of yet, but I'm in a never say never there. And then the only place I hang out is LinkedIn. And because of the unique spelling of my last name, thank you to my husband, if you search Kristin Molenaar, I'm the only one that shows up.
That's awesome. You're very unique in so many ways, Kristin. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun, and I've learned a ton, and you've made it really simple for people to get started by becoming a podcast guest versus saying, go start your podcast. It flipped it on its head, and I love that you do this and you don't have your own podcast. You don't need it. I mean, it's great to have one, but you don't need it. Do what Kristin does, follow her example, and reach out to some people who have some podcasts and take your expertise to the podcasting world, elevate your credibility, and help some more people by expanding your network and just doing what Kristin taught you to do today. Kristin, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
All right. Take care.